longing for those old days, right? Where it happened. So I don't know if you guys see, but I brought a relic out of the kind of the bins, my victors and spoils hat, one of the few that are still in existence. So
that's a collector's item.
That is a collector's item.
That's a collector's item. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, as we wait for everybody to kind of get on board, so I just thought I'd give you guys an update. Book's coming along really well. I got the first draft done on Sunday. So first big kind of, hurdle. And then Jin's been behind me writing and kind of updating. And so that's been really great. I'm going to start, and then Mark Hanat and Aditya out of Magenta in Mumbai have been awesome, and they've been reviewing everything and going through it. The one thing that I just switched up it was Jin's idea, is that we started off with like what just happened, talking about kind of the current COVID thing, and then went into this chapter on passion economy, and then went into a chapter on the ecosystem, kind of how it's all set up, and some great research that Jin is done around architectural innovation, right? That really open talents and architectural innovation. But we just switched that up, and it makes a lot more sense, because I think everybody I talk to, and I don't know about you guys, but when you talk about open talent, they're like, oh, isn't that a way to take advantage of workers? And so I wanted to like put the passion economy as very first, and we're going to have an intro to kind of bring it in, but really address that right up front to say, no, in fact, there are a lot of people that are doing this work passionately across the globe and figuring this out, and then launch into the kind of what is the structure in the ecosystem, like how are we structured, and then go into what happened and why did that get accelerated. So anyway, just some details, and super stoked to kind of share more about that. The other thing, and Nicholas, I see you on from Beacoland. I've been kind of singing your praises yesterday, and talked to Jeff Schwartz. I don't know if Jeff's here today, but Jeff was at Deloitte, the head of future of work, and now he's at Gloat. And I'm really intrigued with what Gloat's doing, and especially in bringing kind of talent marketplaces internally, and thinking about like building the taskification, all the things we talk about here, of internal mechanisms to build a networked organization, not really looking how to interact with talent outside, but really making a marketplace for internal talent. So anyway, that's kind of a quick update on the book as everybody kind of comes to the show. Maybe we should do a breakout, and then we've got some great stuff. Tammy Browning's here today from KellyOCG, and she's got the 2021 Workforce Agility Report. So super stoked to have Tammy share that today. And lots of good, robust conversations to have. Thanks for coming today, Tammy.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. It's great. Yeah. Thanks, John.
Yeah, let's do our little breakout. For those of you guys that don't know, we usually do this breakout where everybody gets paired with somebody randomly and for 5 minutes and enjoy the conversation, and then we'll all come back and get to it.
I understand
all that stuff. Anybody new on the call today that hasn't had a chance to be a part of the group?
I'm new. My name's Jim Dunn. I'm out of Colorado. I have a small boutique consulting firm, but what really we've got 3 or 4 people who have worked in labor-intensive businesses like call center, KPO, BPO. Our CFO was part of Kantar, which was spun out about a year ago, which was a $4 billion labor-intensive group, and we have a thesis that we're going to partner with equity groups and go in and try to rationalize in the light industrial staffing world.
Great, that's awesome. I'd love to spend more time with you. Kantar from the spinoff of WPP, is that?
Yes, yeah, that's the one that was spun off about a year ago. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was actually knew those guys, Eric Salam and those guys really well, because I almost sold one of my companies to Eric several years ago and decided to go with another group instead. But
yeah, so Eric, this guy's name is Robert Botel. Robert was the CFO for Eric. I know Eric pretty well myself. I did a turnaround for one of their companies.
Oh, that's great.
6 or 7 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. That's great. Well, thanks for being here. Who else is new?
Yeah, John. So I'm also new. This is my first call. Getting connected with all you wonderful people, and thanks to Mafe for getting me invited into the group. So I work out of Bangalore in India. Excuse me. I head the global organization development for an outsourcing company by the name of Hinduja Global Solutions. And I've been working here for last 10 years or over 10 years now. And in my different roles along with organization talent, I was also leading the diversity and inclusion function for 4 years. And currently I'm more responsible for the top 100, 150 leaders development, as well as succession planning, etc. So happy to be here.
Oh, so good to have you, man. That's great. Who else is new?
Hi, John.
Oh, sorry.
My name is Kanan, and I'm based out of Gurgaon, India. And thanks to Mafe, I've been introduced by her to this group. And I basically work for a company called Gold Red Consulting. We are into business transformation. We practice a management science called theory of constraints, which helps in improving the cash flows, in improving the working capital management, and ultimately transforming the companies. So I'm into management consulting, practicing theory of constraint for more than 15 years now. And before that, I was responsible for starting up some companies, including a chain of specialty stores as well as country operations. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Colin, thanks so much for being here. And Jürgen, I heard I saw you raise your hand too.
Yeah, good afternoon from London. My name is Jürgen Donaldson. I'm also here thanks to Maffei, so thank you for the invite. I've been in the corporate recruitment space for the last 17 years, working for the likes of JP Morgan and Citi. And for the last 2 years, I've been an advocate for the visually impaired and disabled people because I lost my eyesight after getting a brain tumor. So massively invested in diversity and inclusion for lots of different reasons, and very excited to be here.
That's great. Awesome. Well, thanks, Jürgen. Thanks for being here. Anybody else? No? Hey, Jeff, I don't know if you saw the comment there from John Healy, but nice haircut. It looks like your thing, your screen's cutting your head off there. You got a new square top head.
Yeah, I think it's the video. And John, thanks for the shout out. I was on the phone. I was just walking and getting a coffee here in Manhattan. And good luck writing the book. We were chatting about it yesterday, and it is a labor of love. So just keep going.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, it's been a while since I wrote my last one. This is number 6, and I've kind of I think it's like what I hear. It's like having a kid. Like you forget, like when you're a woman, have the pain and all that kind of stuff that comes with that, and then you're psyched to have another one, but you're like, wow. And I feel like that, right? I'm kind of in the middle of the birthing process, and it's painful. Hey, just to the group, Jeff and I had an amazing conversation yesterday, and it's cool to see him transition from Deloitte over to Gloat. And I'm super stoked because the conversation was really made a lot of sense to me on the idea of if we're trying to help companies become networked organizations to tap into open talent, then one of the things we have to do is not just create frameworks for the organizations, but we've got to create tools that allow them to start experimenting with taskification of work and looking at their own employees as a marketplace and things like that. Jeff, if you've got a minute or two, just kind of I would really encourage you to just chat a little bit, because I think it's super important to shift that mindset inside a company to say, oh, we can work with talent as a marketplace and as people that want to do different things that maybe we didn't hire them for.
Yeah, so very briefly, and I could talk about it a long time. I have my book over my shoulder. I published a book in January, and I was saying to Jim when we did the one-on-ones a second ago that the thesis of the book in one line is that 21st century careers and work require 21st century maps and mental models and mindsets, and we're sort of held back because we're using 20th century mindsets and maps and frameworks. And a big part of that is the open talent economy, both inside and outside organizations. I'll just summarize it this way. We've got some great material on the Gloat website. We've been talking with everybody about the Great Resignation, but we've seen the data in the US where there's it's 10 million people, there's 10 million jobs being posted, and the supply chains are tight around the world, including in talent. And what we're focusing on is creating opportunity within organizations, both large and small. And it's really taken off in the last few years. Gloat's been doing this for 5 years. We have an amazing set of the biggest companies in the world who are doing it. And I'll just end with one stat, John, which I'm sure people on this call and Zoom are familiar with. it's still amazing that it is easier in almost every company and organization to find a job outside the organization versus inside, both in terms of visibility, in terms of access, in terms of agency, what the culture is in the organization. And organizations like Unilever and PepsiCo and MasterCard and HSBC and MetLife, and who've been doing this for a few years, Schneider Electric, have found an amazing set of opportunities with what they're doing and its impact on not just retention, but what we were talking about yesterday, the passion economy, giving people the opportunity to explore what they want to do inside their company, not feeling if you want to do something interesting, you need to go outside. So I think the connection between internal marketplaces and the network ecosystem economy is huge. And it's a very interesting time, especially as we're pivoting from 2021 to 2022. So that's a very brief but New York fast summary, John.
Yeah, I love that. I love it. I think one of the things I asked Jeff yesterday is like, I would love to figure out, I don't think anybody knows that yet, and I'm sure Gloat will be the first to figure it out, but like, what's the cognitive surplus inside organizations that people are either calling it in and, just got it so dialed that they're off kind of doing other things, or not in the right place and don't have the passion to do the work they want. Like what, if you implemented a market solution, like what kind of acceleration would you get? I think it's something interesting to understand and explore, and psyched that you guys are leading the way. And Nicholas, from Vicoland's on the call too. So, Jeff and Nicholas, you guys need to connect. Nicholas, I was telling Jeff about Vicoland and super stoked to what you guys are doing. So make sure that you guys either, exchange your emails in the chat or something, but make sure you make the connection. So
Nice.
Very, very good. Thanks. Hey, I'm super psyched to have Tammy Browning here and to talk about the 2021 Workforce Agility report. I know, John, you had a chance to work with Tammy. Maybe you could introduce her, because you're way more familiar with her great work and what she's doing since you worked side by side with her.
I'm honored to introduce Tammy. So Tammy's the president of Kelly's outsourcing and consulting group, known as KellyOCG. And just someone who has been both an operational leader and a thought leader in the industry for quite a bit of time. And as Kelly went through a restructuring, reorganization, Tammy was charged with really reshaping the thinking of the organization to push some things forward a little bit more aggressively. Think of Kelly as servicing that Global 2000 marketplace as a primary piece in rethinking their workforce strategy. So I'll leave it to her to kind of share the detail of the research that they've been doing since I left the organization and kind of talk about what she's up to.
Great. Well, welcome, Tammy.
Yeah. Thank you, John. And I think John Healy, it's an honor. I think he actually did more justice in talking about who I am than I could probably do for myself, but I'll give you a little bit of context about who I am and really what I bring to the table. And then we'll talk about this workforce agility report and some of the statistics and findings. And what I'll also do, so I'll give about a 15-minute sort of walkthrough, and then I'm going to leave some time to answer some questions, because it's going to provoke some thought. I'm confident of that. But with that, as John said, I am the president of OCG, and I have been in the space for 22 years. That ages me significantly. I'm live, sit, and breathe and pay taxes in the state of California. So I'm trying to avoid this sunlight that is coming up over my head here. So I apologize for that if I keep trying to push myself back or if I'm far away from the camera, but it's the sun. And, OCG is really a global workforce solutions providing organization that really connects organizations with people, and it fuels their business needs. So we really are solving problems for any way by which an organization wants to procure talent in any way, shape, or form. And so with that, if you could, we've got Cynthia who's going to run some slides for me. Cynthia, if you could jump into that first yellow slide, that would be awesome. So a couple of things that I want to talk about, when we consider the workforce agility report, what is it, first of all? So our workforce agility report, we actually started to ask organizations question in Asia Pacific region. So it was Asia only. We started in 2017, and it was to really give our local teams some information about actually go to market. It was what they were going to do, what were customers thinking about, what were their dynamics, what was happening. And what ended up happening is there was this significant finding of just the gaps and the opportunities that were identified and the business problems that we could solve as a result of this workforce agility report. So we launched it this year for the first time globally across APAC, EMEA, and North America, which included local employers' insights and sort of that on the ground, that boots on the ground perspective across the world. We surveyed over 1,000 senior executives, of which 20% of those were somewhere in the C-suite or some type of board role across 13 different countries. And the report itself in 2021 focused on this post-pandemic environment. While it doesn't address the future of work, which is kind of now synonymous with post-pandemic, what it did address was the 4 dynamics of what we're calling a resilient workforce. So first, I think workforce fluidity was one that we really centered in on, and any way you can look at that as a third-party labor. So any way a company can leverage talent that is not their own full-time employees to get work done. That was one area. The second area was DE&I, which we'll talk a little bit about and what my experiences are specifically from a customer perspective today. We also looked at employee experience and really this engagement conversation, which we were just talking about here a second ago. And then of course, tech adoption, and think about that tech adoption in the workforce, less about do you have a computer or cell phone or Wi-Fi, it's the tech adoption that's enabling people to work differently in their roles is what we focused on. And so the report is very actionable. There's many steps in it. And in fact, it will address each of these 4 dynamics and how organizations like all of you on this phone today can thrive using this data. So if I pivot to sort of the next slide and talk about the pandemic triggers that we're seeing, which is this systemic shift in how and when work gets done. And as you know, through the pandemic, this happened overnight. So what our research found is that there's no new normal. In fact, the future of work will be defined by this sort of continuous state of flux now. The pandemic has sort of proved that the remote work has allowed employees to be actually more productive than they were before, and it's providing much more individualism and collaboration than anyone anticipated that it would. And sort of this new way of working opens up a wider and diverse population of employees for organizations to tap into. So it's increasing their ability to find talent across the world in roles they would have maybe required to be on site. And with that, what some of our data indicated is more than half of the respondents that we saw, they saw productivity improvements across their talent organization. And more than half saw that employee satisfaction and turnover in the past year actually decreased. We're going to talk a bit more about that because that's dynamic and changing every single day. And then 60% of executives agree that the talent has never been more important as a source of a competitive advantage. And despite that, most organizations, while they recognize that there's these major gaps, they're actually taking no action to transform their culture, their talent management, their best practices, and others. So if we now kind of pivot a little bit, Cynthia, if you can go to the next slide, I'll share with you some of the statistics that we uncovered. So first, across the 4 dynamics of the report, it is a significantly in-depth report, so I'm going really high level with some of these statistics. I only hit on the ones that I think are really relevant today, but understand we'll offer this report up to you at the end of today. Is when we look at the report, post-pandemic, 59% of executives say their business will in fact adopt a hybrid model. Now keep in mind, remote work is here to stay. Organizations absolutely need to adapt to that, and that is a global strategy and initiative that organizations are taking. And yes, there will be organizations that have amnesia that will go back to, we want everybody to be on site, but the ones that are going to be ahead of the game will stay in this sort of hybrid model. And we'll talk a little bit more about those kinds of organizations. 1 in 4 companies believe that their leaders lack the skills to manage remote workforce. So when you think about that, it's a little alarming that our leaders, these C-suite executives and 1 layer down, say, yeah, we want a hybrid workforce, but we actually don't think the leaders that we have in the seats that they're in actually know how to lead a remote workforce. 49% of executives say they will have a clear view of this optimal mix of talent across businesses, and 25% say the workforce has a skill gap that they're not even sure how to address in this remote environment. So what that really is saying is, when you think of that data, you've got people that we know need to be upskilled, reskilled, perhaps moved into new roles. There's a very prevalent conversation that's happening today, a really relevant one around how do you actually train people in this remote environment, in this hybrid model. And so 55% of executives say that their strategies are really struggling in that space. And what we're also seeing is many are saying their DE&I strategies and their top talent are underrepresented. So 55% of executives say their DE&I is underrepresented just in general across their organization. And a very small minority of organizations have leading edge technology to address these gaps. So Cynthia, if you kind of go to the next slide, I'm going to talk about the two distinct organizations that kind of popped out, or the worker groups that popped out in our report. So first we identified the vanguards and the laggards. Our vanguards are those organizations that are significantly ahead or are more ahead, and the laggards are those that are behind. Only 10% of the respondents that responded actually fall in the vanguard space. So when you hear some of the statistics that I'm going to share, keep in mind only 10% are actually ahead of the game. So vanguards are embracing the change and enjoying much better business results. So keep that in mind as we talk through. The vanguards are making up about 10%, as I said, and they're reporting that overall employee well-being and productivity has improved. In fact, 94% of them reported revenue growth in the last 3 years. Whereby in the laggard space, it's a very different dynamic. So what makes them very different is we discovered that vanguards are taking strategic long-term approaches to improve resiliency, agility, well-being of their workforce, and comparing them to the laggards who are actually reporting employee decline in well-being and productivity and lost revenue streams, as well as that this notion of lack of engagement just overall, which is becoming a greater dynamic, which I'll talk about in a second. The vanguards are also looking at how remote work is going to increase the ability of innovation. They've actually found the vanguards are saying there's more innovative thought leadership happening in their organizations now than pre-pandemic. And they're also saying these four dynamics are super critical to their overall agility and the resiliency that they have to be more profitable as an organization. So let me talk a little bit about sort of that comparative analysis. So if you'll go to the comparative analysis says that the vanguards and the laggards side by side, if you look at the vanguards, they've amplified workforce fluidity. They have a comprehensive strategy for bridging skill gaps by employing new talent, and they're looking at contingent labor and other labor channels to engage either statement of work or outcome-based work or some way to bridge the gaps of their overall business needs that they have. This gives them, of course, the ability to be more nimble, more agile, be much more rapid, and so on. So this more multi-tiered approach is sort of bridging that gap for the vanguards in a much greater way than we're seeing our laggards who are really struggling in this very tight labor market. More than 1/3 of vanguards are actually hiring more permanent talent too, but they're recognizing that they need this more fluid workforce in order to get work done. 2/3 have employed more contingent workers in this last 18 months, and more than 52% of them have implemented some kind of reskilling or upskilling across their organization to include their full-time and contingent work as they need to. They're working sort of in this mitigating their risk by having greater visibility. So there is still this notion, even in the vanguard space, that we need more visibility. In fact, 87% of the vanguards say improving visibility across the talent is more important to their workforce in the future than ever before. So when you think about those are staggering statistics. Then if we kind of pivot a little bit and talk about the next set of data, They're also building a far better, so when you think about the Vanguards, they're building a far better employee experience. So 91% of the Vanguards rank improving employee experience, which is so fascinating, as high, if not higher, than their customer service expectations. They're actually making a direct correlation between their performance in their business over the last couple of years related to their customer experience, and finding their customers are more engaged because their talent is more engaged on the customer level. And a positive employee experience has really led to far greater retention than our laggards, their productivity, their engagement. This translation of better business results is what we're seeing. And also what I'm seeing from my seat as an organization, which is really kind of an interesting viewpoint, is there's this notion which Jeff just mentioned, this sort of great resignation. It's a real thing. It is happening every single day. We are seeing it. In fact, our demand for talent today is up nearly 30 to 40% of what it used to be in the contingent labor space. And in the full-time labor space, when you look across our organizations around recruitment process outsourcing or full-time hiring, we're up nearly 70%. So if you consider those numbers and those staggering expectations around talent, but you've got this leaky bucket of talent going out the back door because they're not engaged in their job, it's a absolute disaster waiting to happen. So the Vanguards are significantly ahead of this, and what they're doing is they're actually conducting regular employee surveys. They've got focus groups, they have affinity groups, they understand the employee's experience, and they are far more ahead than the laggards in a very big way. And keep in mind, this is only 10% of organizations are actually in this Vanguard space. So the other thing about the Vanguards is involving, they've really involved their employees in the everyday definition, the shaping of the roles, and they're actually getting the information about their employee value propositions from the people that work in these roles. So they're talking to their employees, they're far more engaged, and they're looking at them much more holistically. Now, if I spend a little time on DE&I, this, by the way, is the #1 question I have been asked in the last 18 months from every major Fortune 100 company is, how can you help me become more diverse in our organization? This isn't about spend or dollars. This is about talent and people, and how can we be far more evolved in our talent attraction strategies, specifically related to diverse workforce. So what's happened in the Vanguard space is they're embracing DE&I well beyond what any organization is doing. They're actually moving beyond just talking about DE&I, and they've put meaningful, actionable strategies in place. In fact, the Vanguards are more likely to have a company-wide strategy around DEI that attract talent from underrepresented communities, and they're providing training and support and upskilling and reskilling across their organization. 43% of executives say that executing a fully developed DE&I strategy for their permanent workforce, 43% of them are doing that today in the Vanguard space. But what's really alarming, and for me, especially in the seat that I sit in today, is only 19% of organizations are actually looking at their DE&I strategies within their contingent labor population. And why that's alarming is can you think about just the notion that most organizations are increasing their usage of contingent labor, and oftentimes is their feeder pool for their full-time resources, yet only 19% are even addressing DE&I and ensuring that their employees are in a diverse population, that they're feeling like they have equity and that they're included. Our Vanguards are twice as likely to have developed a strategy that can, in fact, be communicated effectively. So these organizations are sharing what their policies are, what their targets are, how they're going about it, what their goals are as an organization, and they're gaining support from their employees through employee experience and other ways to help bridge these DE&I gaps. So with that, if I jump ahead a little bit and then talk about that employee experience, if you will, I want to spend a second on really talking about, so employee experience and leading edge technology is kind of fascinating. I mentioned early on that this isn't about the fact that everybody went from working in potentially whatever environment they were in to everyone working from home at the same time and their computers working. our vanguards are suggesting that their leading edge technology is actually critical to managing this flux world that we will be in. In fact, most of organizations, and particularly the laggards, are feeling overwhelmed by the amount of technology that's even out there to help worker productivity. They have no idea what to bring to their organizations, how to address these gaps, what technologies are best for them. But the vanguards are significantly ahead here. In fact, vanguards are adopting new technologies at a faster rate of pace and are realizing better employee engagement, better employee experiences, and stronger employee value propositions. And when you think about this next generation of workforce, which is really interesting, the number one question right now in the offer process, so as we're looking at how people are being employed and what's happening today, the number one question is, what is my tech package in my job? I don't know if you're experiencing that. It's super fascinating. What do I get? Are you shipping me, screens? Do I get a ring? Do I get a phone? What do I get? And by the way, what technologies do I have that are going to make my job easier, period? And so the vanguards are creating this use of technology to gain better visibility, and they're using this as their employee value proposition, and they're beating out their laggards by a landslide in their employee value proposition strategies. So with that, how can you be a vanguard? I mean, the net is many organizations are never going to return to the way it was post-COVID. I mean, we are in a completely different world. We all know that. And I'm sure you're all experiencing that every day. Employees are going to continue to demand greater flexibility. In fact, we've been talking about it for some time, but this now more than ever, the employee themselves is actually interviewing the organization more than you're interviewing them. And so we've really got to shift our thinking in terms of how we're engaging, how we're staying ahead of the curve here. Employees need to really, these employers really need to rethink how they manage their workforce, how people are managed, and how their jobs are evolving. So adapting to this uncertain future is going to be the best way to remain resilient, understand where to get your information about it, and then understand what your financial goals are and bring your employees in to help solve some of those problems. And then of course, none of these goals are going to be easy to achieve. But as long as we're understanding it and gaining greater visibility, we can. So I think for me, by focusing on the 4 dynamics that we did here in this workforce agility report, what we're finding is companies that are looking at those 4 dynamics and really distilling down what they mean to their organization. You're going to boost employee experience, you're going to boost engagement, you're going to boost up your productivity, and you're going to be able to manage employees far better than you ever did before. So with that, if you want a copy of the report, there's a couple of ways that you can get it. So you can go on the KellyOCG website and /war, which is a quick way to get it if you would like that. But if you also just kind of want to connect with me, I'll happily send you the report as well and get it out to you, and even in some cases talk through the very finite detail, because again, it's very long, it's hundreds of pages. So if you want to look at that, shoot me a note on LinkedIn. You can find me on Tammy Browning and just put in OCG and I'll be the first person that pops up. So John, I'm going to hand it back to you, but I think we may have a few minutes for questions to really kind of dig deeper. I'm happy to answer. I hope I provoked some thoughts to answer some questions.
Yeah, that was super awesome, Tammy. I really appreciate it. And that really nice frame on vanguards and laggards, and love that kind of transition. So lots of really good learnings. I want to open it up because I think a lot of people will have a lot of questions. So anybody want to raise their hand, or anybody want to jump in here? James.
Yes, well, thank you, Tammy. That was really insightful. My question to you is, when you look at pay grades, would you give a different answer for something that's at minimum wage versus 15 to 20, and then I would also say, how does this affect nearshore and offshore? Yeah, really interesting. So a couple of things. One, the wage conversation is going to be a real conversation for the coming years. And in fact, the earlier comments around that worker that's really under the $17 an hour range, we are really struggling in that space, particularly manufacturing, light industrial, and others, to attract talent in this way.
And so, yes, it does have an implication and an impact if your wage rates are far below the competitive landscape. So there's no question that's the case. And in fact, what we're seeing is many organizations are looking more holistically at their total compensation packages and determining their variable comp a little different than they used to before to be able to attract talent in a different way from an employee value proposition. The example I will give on that, and it's a real one, is that there are several organizations that sometimes have bonus structures that are baked into total comp, right? Not every role has that, but there are some that do. Those decisions are potentially removing the bonus and increasing the pay rate, because what they're finding through their surveys is that, as most of us would agree in a leadership position, they would much rather have the pay than the bonus, obviously. So how do you manage the work performance in that way? So it is a real question that we need to be asking ourselves over the next and coming months. The report itself does break down regionally. So while it is a global report, we do have it broken down, and you can triple click down all the way into the dynamics in APAC, EMEA, and in North America to help address that global question that you had. So there is a lot of content about how they're experiencing things slightly different in their regions. And there are different dynamics when you consider EMEA versus APAC versus North America. It is extremely different. So we wanted the report to be able to give that level of detail.
Love it. Jürgen.
Hi, Tammy. My name's Jürgen. Question relating to how the Vanguards are approaching diversity more specifically. Is there any expansion around their definition of diversity? So pulling in kind of additional classifications beyond the atypical gender, race, and veteran status?
You know, the report does not tell you that, but I will tell you from my seat, my experience in that is yes. So many organizations today are actually looking at what does diversity truly mean? Because many years ago, and not that many years ago, it was probably just a few years ago, diversity was much more about spend under management and all the credits that could come with that. Today, it's now more about the talent. So please help me with specific worker populations, whether that's that underrepresented talent. So that could be inner city, that could be opportunity, youth and kids and developing them up. That could be specifically bringing in more African Americans, more Asians. So it depends on the organization where they sit, the types of skills that they're looking to employ, and the areas by which they want to bring them in. And they're also looking at how they can attract that talent at a much younger age. So there was a time where, you know, all your recruiting started to happen at the college level about 10 years ago. But if you really think back, for anyone that's been in the employment world for a long time, we used to groom talent from the high school levels. They're considering getting far deeper into the education levels. And you saw that a little bit in STEM in the last few years, but you're seeing that now across labor categories to even include manufacturing and light industrial, as we're seeing that upskilling and reskilling for the future of work dialogue. Keep in mind, future work's not in the report the way that it's defined. It's more post-COVID, but there is some dynamics for future work and upskilling and reskilling that we need to be considering as well.
Excellent, excellent. Hey, Chuck.
Hi, Tammy. I had a question kind of related to something happened in my life this past weekend. Locally, in one of our biggest tourist towns, 6 restaurant pubs actually closed their doors because they couldn't get people. They just couldn't have people served. And I just thought that was kind of, when I first saw it, like a canary in a coal mine kind of thought going ahead. And we're going to be facing this kind of dilemma where organizations are just going to say, sorry, I cannot respond because I'm a lack of labor and a lack of situation.
I think everybody is experiencing that. It doesn't matter where you're at in the world. Every single person is experiencing the talent dynamic, whether in a global organization that's delivering a product, or you're in a restaurant or any other service industry for that matter. Particularly in North America, a couple of things to keep in mind. This is a little different for the rest of the world, but not as different because everybody has legislation different. But particularly here in North America, what we're seeing is the stimulus packages are actually driving some of that. And what has happened is organizations have not been able to sustain the last year. So their revenue bases are so low, they have no choice but to close their doors. And what we're seeing is most of the stimulus money now is done. And in fact, what has happened here in North America is we're seeing our talent pools, what used to be about a 1 to 3 submit ratio, meaning a candidate applying to a job, is back up to about 1 to 12. So we're seeing this influx of people now saying, wow, my stimulus money, particularly under that $17 an hour, is drying up and I have to go find a job. So let's hope for these employers that are losing their businesses that this is going to be a leaky bucket that slows here very quickly. But it was a very real dynamic over the last 18 months. And it's heartbreaking to watch. I think for all of us, there's no statistic, there's no report, there's nothing that we could say it will solve this problem. It's really going to be getting people back into the workforce and really looking at how we encourage people to work and how we encourage them to grow and groom in their careers. And it's really going to take every single person on this call and around the world talking to people about why it's so important to get back to work.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Tammy. Oh, who's next? Anybody else? Yeah. Hey, James.
So one quick one on technology adoption. So from the point of view of a contingent workforce provider, so you're using your client's, basically job description. You're putting your worker, you're hiring a worker, you're putting them out there to be trained and also to be managed. What technology has promised to create a loyal workforce for that contingent workforce provider?
Yeah, there's a lot of dynamics that have happened over the last number of years. If we could really start doing some real education on what co-employment really means to companies and how to mitigate that, we would be far further ahead than we are today. Because some of the question you just asked around tech adoption and using employers' technology and really engaging, we have very little visibility and control into that in our contingent space until the worker goes to work. So what we'd love to do is get more involved with educating the employers on what it is they can do to make people more productive, what we can do to listen to the contingent labor population. Because when I talked about organizations, particularly under DE&I, that are surveying their employees, they're not surveying contingent workers, they're surveying their full-time workforce. So if we can actually have far deeper conversations about how to get into the heads of the people that ultimately will likely become full-time employees, we can start addressing some of those tech challenges. We are looking that from a pure play perspective, there are a few technologies out there from an ATS perspective. So we look at applicant tracking. There is a few of those technologies that are now actually tracking the life of the life of a contingent worker, tracking the training that they're receiving, tracking their development, and we're seeing that technology start to come into our contingent labor populations. It was initially in recruitment process and outsourcing, where you could follow the journey of a worker through their life cycle and see what their career progression was. We're seeing those tech companies actually enter into the temp labor space to give more visibility. And that's the education that we can help give to many organizations are what really can you do in your ATS or in your back office or in your, maybe HRIS system that is that tracking contingent labor.
Excellent. Great answer. Who else? Anybody else have some questions? Love to continue to have the dialogue. I'm going to start calling on people then. Steve Rader, you're always first. You always have great thoughts about all this stuff.
I love this. This is great. I mean, this is really reinforcing a lot of things we've been talking about for a long time. I think that it's astounding how much the pandemic accelerated things. I think the trends were all there beforehand, or a lot of them, and the fact that the pandemic has accelerated to this rate. I mean, it is just astounding. And you mentioned the lifelong learning pieces and the piece of the future work. That's all still there, right? That's in addition to all of this. So I think there's some interesting dynamics. I don't think I heard you say anything about the kind of massive retirement piece going on, but I may have missed that. But there's 10,000 baby boomers a day retiring out of the workforce every single day. Like, that's just adding to this whole picture. So interesting stuff. I love all of this. So thank you, Tammy. This has been great.
Yeah. the generational information is really fascinating because it's not just the baby boomers, it's the women leaving the workforce as well in a big way, massive amounts of women because of the pandemic and all varying reasons why it just doesn't make sense to have two household incomes anymore. But that said, generationally speaking, if I can hit on that really quickly, because Steve, you bring up a great point. When you look at the statistics specifically around the millennial population and their engagement, only 32% of millennials are even engaged in their jobs. So you want to talk about that, great resignation that was mentioned earlier by Jeff. That's why it's a real thing, because this generation doesn't have loyalty to anyone. So your employee value proposition has to be so deep. The engagement strategies you have to address the 4 dynamics that I mentioned. And you also have to understand their personal dynamic very well. And I'm not so sure that we truly, as executives, as leaders, and as employers, have really gotten into the heads of what make people tick. So when we think about that generation of millennials, it makes up the greatest population of the workforce today, the greatest number. And as we've seen statistically, from the baby boomers all the way through to now and the next generation coming in, it's only going to get worse. That's not going to get better because the next generation has a whole set of other priorities and initiatives that they're wanting today. So again, that's why tech adoption, making people's jobs easier, making their lives a lot easier, giving them meaningful work more now than ever. People want to be able to connect what they do every single day to some meaningful output. So you have to start explaining to people, the workforce, why it is they're doing the job they're doing today, and they want to know the impact that they're having on the company. So to the extent that you can share as much information about global strategy, global thinking, enterprise level, that's not too much information for this group to absorb.
Yeah, that's great. Really good stuff. Hey, Brian Pena, you always have such vast experience, and any thoughts? You've seen this kind of going on for so long. Oh, I think you got it.
I think this is really exciting stuff. I'm always interested to see where best practices are evolving. I think the thing that I'm interested in, and I don't know if the data has this in there, Tammy, is when we think about D&I, oftentimes it's limited to certain subsets of our culture, but I think we could expand, diversity and inclusion, the people like who are neurodiverse or are differently abled and things like that. In your data, do you see that being incorporated into the discussion about how you might be, how companies who are at the leading edge may be able to expand that definition of what it takes to incorporate diverse groups into their talent pool?
Yeah, underrepresented talent, which includes neurodiverse, again, the underrepresented opportunity youth, the inner city kids, perhaps just generally people that don't have the opportunities, where also our data goes deeper into minor criminal offenses, which is a big data point for us, where we're ruling out talent that maybe shouldn't be ruled out based on a background check or some other thing that precludes them from getting a job. So yeah, Brian, and by the way, it's great to see you. It would be, the data is very specific on how to address diversity and the mix of talent to be able to bridge those skill gaps that are needed today. And while it's not in the report in a big picture, we are working on something secondary, because to me, the future of work and the post-pandemic are mutually exclusive. However, they've sort of merged in our conversation. So everybody's talking about them as one and the same, but the fact of the matter is they're still mutually exclusive. And we have got to understand our diversity strategies when we look at the future of work, because that talent can help bridge those gaps far quicker than maybe some other talent populations can. So I think
you brought up something really, I'm so sorry. You brought up something really that I thought was really interesting, which is the second chance workforce, right? I think that's going to be a bigger and bigger issue. I think I even found an article on LinkedIn I posted this morning about it. I think that, are you seeing across your clients kind of a reassessment of their requirements for hiring people as well? I mean, I think, people who have felony backgrounds for maybe drunk driving, but they don't drive, whatever those are you seeing that evolve?
So I am seeing it evolve, but I'm an extraordinarily transparent person. So I'm going to also answer it extremely honestly. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody's saying, help me understand how I can do a better job of bringing in this underrepresented talent in any way, shape, or form. The problem is that then we give the requisition in the hiring process to the hiring managers to actually hire whom they want. And there are still so many biases in the hiring process that are ruling out these people. In addition to that, some of our own corporate policies, so when you look at your companies today and you go dust off what your risk tolerance is, a lot of time your TA and your HR organizations will tell you, we don't even allow for people with this skill level to even go through the next round to the hiring manager to even see them. So we've got a multi-pronged issue. Yes, conversations are talking about it, but they have to address their risk tolerance. They have to understand how they're going to engage them. They also have to understand how the hiring manager community can in fact interview them, and they need to train their hiring managers on removing the biases in the hiring process. And then they need to watch that talent through the life of their assignments and make sure that they're engaged, because if you look at some of the statistics, the diverse talent population, this is anecdotal, but I have more facts around it because we have all the data, actually is more likely to leave their job in the first year because they don't feel engaged in their organization, or perhaps they feel like they're an island within their organization. So it's absolutely a real thing, no question.
That's great. Hey, we've got time for one more question. I'm going to leave it to Link. Let's make it quick.
Oh man, no pressure. I had asked a question in the chat. I think it's important to maybe highlight that, and ask at the same time what we do about it, about this kind of recreation of new minority groups that, as we, attract new talent and younger talent, doesn't that create a new set of minorities of older people that are now displaced from their jobs or realizing that their Social Security and their pensions aren't enough to keep them afloat, and so they're reaching out looking for work? Doesn't that put them in a siloed group because they're having problems being found now that companies are attracting new talent that is younger? So does that make sense? What is the challenge? How do we address this recreation of new minority groups within the work that we're doing?
Yeah, I think the older generations would appreciate your question, because they, at the end of the day, do feel excluded. They do feel ruled out very quickly. Their resumes are often far deeper and have far more experience, and so they're ruled out as being overqualified. And the fact of the matter is, they still want to have meaningful work. So yeah, I have not seen it manifest itself in terms of it being its own diverse population, but I absolutely see it as being an opportunity for every organization to have metrics and goals in their diversity, equity, inclusion strategies, to have all ways by which a person identifies addressed in their hiring process. So I do believe that needs to be one of them, in addition to getting women back to work and various other things that we as employers need to do. That's
awesome. I know we're at time. Thank you so much to everybody. I love you guys. Tammy, that was a really amazing talk. Thank you so much. If we could, I would love to schedule some time with you one-on-one to talk about this upcoming book that Jen and Kareem Lakhani and I are writing. And it would be great to include some of your research and some of your points of view, because I think it's super important what you're doing. And I love the paradigm that you've created with the vanguards and the laggards, and the way that you're thinking about it. It's very hopeful and gives companies a way to kind of track to a new paradigm. So thanks again, everybody. Love you guys. Oh, go ahead, Tammy.
I was just going to say, I think there's a couple other questions in the chat. Brandon, if you want to forward those to me, I'll answer them in an email. I'll be happy to do that.
That'd be super fun.
Will do.
Thanks so much. Love you guys. This is always such an amazing group. Every week I'm just blown away by the knowledge and the thoughtfulness and just the community that we've all created together. So again, thanks again, and we'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
And happy Labor Day.
Happy Labor Day.
Thank you, guys.
All the best. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.